We're very honored today to have with us Justice Barbara A. Jackson from the North Carolina Supreme Court. Justice Jackson received her undergraduate and her law degree from the University of North Carolina, after which she clerked on the Supreme Court as a clerk for Justice Burley Mitchell. Then after several years successfully in private practice, she became the general counsel to the North Carolina Department of Labor, then served on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and for the last 4 years has served as a justice on our North Carolina Supreme Court. Justice Jackson recently received her Master's in Law and Judicial Studies, just recently, from the Duke University School of Law earlier this year. So it is with great honor and pleasure that I introduce to you our keynote speaker at this session of court, Justice Barbara Jackson.
Thank you, Gray. It's an honor to be here with you today. First, I'd like to say congratulations and welcome to the bar, although I recognize that's a little premature, but I think it sets the tone for what I'd like to say and the rest of what I'm going to talk with you about. So welcome to the bar. We all say that to new attorneys when they're sworn in, but what do we really mean? The use of the term bar to mean the whole body of lawyers or the legal profession comes from English custom. In the early 16th century, a railing divided the hall and the Inns of Courts, with students occupying the body of the hall and readers or benchers on the other side. Students who officially became lawyers were called to the bar, crossing the symbolic physical barrier and thus admitted to the bar. Later, this term was popularly assumed to mean the wooden railing, marking off the area around the judge's seat in a courtroom, where prisoners stood for arraignment or where a barrister stood to plead. As I thought about what to talk about with you today, I also thought about bringing along a prop or an exhibit, namely my framed law license. So I think Gray and I had a little bit of a mind meld there. The reason I thought about bringing it was to impress upon you its importance in your life. I still remember how excited I was to receive this very large formal document and how much it meant to me to select a special frame, one that would do it justice, so to speak. That law license is the outward symbol of what you have accomplished already, as well as the promise of what is to come. I encourage you to take your time in deciding how and where you will display it in your life, to look at it often, and to reflect upon what it means to you to be a member of this profession. In his 1916 address to the American Bar Association, Elihu Root, a prominent attorney, statesman, and Nobel Peace Prize winner, explained, "To the student of the law, there comes from all the glorious history of the profession of advocacy, great traditions and ethical ideals, and lofty conceptions of the honor and dignity of the profession, of courage and loyalty for the maintenance of the law and the liberty that it guards. It is to a bar inspired by these great traditions, imbued with this spirit, not commercialized, not playing a sordid game, not cunning and subtle and technical, or seeking unfair advantage, a bar jealous of the honor of the profession and proud of its high calling for the maintenance of justice, that we must look to for the effective administration of the law." Root's address illustrates one of the core notions of professional ethics, that the idea is a legal career should not be pursued as a business. The sense that values are at stake that are too important to be left to the vagaries of the free market is pervasive. The famous Harvard Law dean, Roscoe Pound, asserted that the concept of profession involves 3 ideas: organization, learning, and the spirit of public service. The remaining idea, that of gaining a livelihood, is incidental. According to Dean Pound, the spirit of public service is the most important component of professionalism, and even at its worst, he thought professional activity to be restrained and guided by something better than the desire for monetary rewards. The ideal of professionalism for Pound stood as sort of a polar opposite to the extreme regime of competitive individual self-assertion which characterized many of areas of social life at that time. Through its traditions of organization, of learning, and a spirit of service, Pound hoped that the American legal profession might foster the development of a wider spirit of cooperation in place of the unfettered competition of American capitalism. The profession I see today is very different from the one I entered 24 years ago. And although I think the sentiments expressed both by Elihu Root and Dean Pound continue to have value, marked changes within the profession will dictate at least a somewhat different reality than the one that they envisioned in the last century. The reality is that their commentary comes from a time before technology was a central focal point in our lives, before students had to rely upon loans in many instances to obtain their legal education, or perhaps legal education was just foreclosed to many by virtue of economic hardship, and before women and minorities played any meaningful role in the profession. Because of these changes, young lawyers are asked to undertake more responsibility than they may have in the past. The economic realities of the legal community during the past several years have forced many recent law school graduates, like yourselves, to hang out a shingle and start their own practice as their first step out of law school. Combined with the demands of practicing law in the age of technology, the responsibilities placed on these new graduates is daunting. That's why I encourage you to seek out mentors as you enter into your new profession. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? You may find them at work, through local bar associations, or even your more experienced peers. But I believe they're essential to your continuing growth as a lawyer. I've been very fortunate. At every stage of my legal career, I've had wonderful mentors, lawyers who exemplified the best in our profession. At the Supreme Court, I worked for Justice Burley Mitchell, who continues to practice here in Raleigh, and who I hope you'll take the opportunity to get to know, if you have the opportunity. His expectations for his law clerks were high. On our first day, he let us know if we needed to work 24/7 to wrap up an opinion in a timely manner, that was what we needed to do. He set the standard that we needed to render justice that not only was accurate, but also timely. Now, don't get me wrong, he was also a lot of fun to work with, and his knowledge of the law was really remarkable, and I think sometimes underestimated. In particular, I've always appreciated his common sense approach to resolving cases. After concluding my clerkship, I had the good fortune to work for Jim Trotter, who was general counsel to Governor Jim Martin. Mr. Trotter, who still sometimes comes into his office at the age of about 90, is the quintessential Southern gentleman with the most charming Eastern North Carolina accent. He also has a razor-sharp mind, and I was the beneficiary of his wisdom during the year that I worked for him. The wonderful thing about the way he taught me to be a better lawyer was that it didn't feel like he was teaching. I don't think I fully appreciated the lessons that I had learned from him until I became general counsel for the Labor Department over a decade later. And it became crystal clear to me that Mr. Trotter's principled approach to the role of a general counsel, especially a general counsel in state government, was a wonderful model to follow. I left the governor's office for the Governor's Advocacy Council for Persons with Disabilities, or GACPD, which was the protection and advocacy agency for North Carolina at the time. Although we were a state agency, we represented individuals with disabilities in special education, mental health, and other civil rights cases. Excuse me. Again, at GACPD, I was really blessed to have a wonderful supervisor and mentor, Butch Elkins, who now serves as a judge at the Office of Administrative Hearings. When I joined GACPD in 1992, the Americans with Disabilities Act was in its infancy, and I had no experience in the area of disability law, although I had grown up with a grandfather who was severely disabled. Butch served as a mentor to me in two ways. First, he was another great teacher. He encouraged me to take on new challenges, including petitioning the United States Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari, which unfortunately was unsuccessful. And also, he was a wonderful sounding board as I learned this new area of the law. But second, he was a wonderful supervisor, truly exceptional. We lawyers are not always known for our great supervisory skills. So it was a great opportunity to have someone to model early in my career, especially someone who then afforded me the opportunity to supervise other lawyers myself. After leaving GACPD and spending a few years in private practice, I joined the Labor Department in 2001. This was an exciting opportunity because our Labor Commissioner, Cherie Berry, is not an attorney, as many of her predecessors had been. Because of this, the Commissioner and her management team placed a lot of trust in what my office was doing. For me, the Commissioner is one of my non-lawyer mentors. As you can tell from what I've told you already, I hadn't worked with a lot of women attorneys, simply as a matter of coincidence, and in part because of my generation. For me, it was exciting to work with a woman in a leadership position, especially as I developed some interest in running for elective office. I appreciated that the commissioner listened when we presented an issue to her, gave fair weight to everyone's position, and then reached a decision about how she wished to proceed in resolving whatever issue was before her, whether it was a proactive strategy or the solution to a problem. Finally, since I became a judge, I think I have an abundance of mentors, my colleagues on both the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. I'll single out Judge Sanford Steelman on the Court of Appeals because he was such a tremendous mentor for me during my 6 years there. As I hope you have surmised from my background, when I joined the court, my experience was substantially in administrative law with some land use and local government law thrown in from my years in private practice. Prior to joining the Court of Appeals, Judge Steelman had been both a litigator in private practice and a Superior Court judge in Union County. I think one of the most important skills you can develop in being mentored by someone is to recognize and acknowledge your deficits. Clearly, mine was trial practice. Happily, right across the hall, Judge Steelman was always willing to discuss how something works as a practical matter, or some arcane point of law that only we appellate judges seem to get truly excited about. I miss Judge Steelman at the Supreme Court, but I'm fortunate to have 6 able colleagues to serve as mentors there. Each of us has different strengths, and since we conference as a multi-member court of 7, we can each rely upon each other's strengths, from trial practice to family court to both criminal defense and prosecution and workers' compensation. I enjoy our conferences, whether we agree or disagree, because I always come away having learned something. And you may be aware that our Chief Justice, Sarah Parker, has recently retired. It was really a privilege to work with her for 3.5 years. She's a remarkably skilled lawyer and jurist who led our court well, and I know we all will miss her contribution. My point to you is that there's always an opportunity to learn and someone with something to teach you. That person may be more or less experienced than you are. She may be another lawyer or a client. I think the important thing is to be open to that continuing learning experience incumbent upon everyone who chooses to be an attorney. Ours is both a learned and a learning profession. One of my great joys in practicing law and serving as a judge is that I've remained a lifelong learner, both by choice and necessity. Every day, a new problem or issue creeps into my life, a new question looking for an answer. Every day, a new problem, sometimes we find these answers through the legal researching skills we developed in law school, but often we look to those in our profession who have more experience or wisdom to guide us toward the best answer or strategy in resolving a legal problem, because it may not be in a book or on a computer. It may be an issue that exists between 2 parties in conflict that requires our mediation skills, or simply someone who's willing to listen. I wish you well as you embark upon this exciting new phase in your life. Don't forget, as fellow members of the bar, we all want you to succeed, and we hope you will call upon your fellow members of this noble profession for friendship, fellowship, and professional growth. Thank you, and I wish you all the best.